So you all know me. I'm Debbie. I'm the founder of Icing Images, and I would hope that you know Miss Susan Trianos. Um, she is an amazing seasoned decorator. That's one way to say that we've been around the block just a few times. I'm seasoned too, and I'm probably like, well, she's more seasoned in this field than me, but I think I'm older than her. So anyway, enough about putting my foot in my mouth. Susan came to me a while ago. I don't even remember how long ago. And we were talking about the opportunity to put she wanted to have her brand, and she has created this amazing brand name of products, the Susan Trianos collection. And I was so excited about it because for those of you who don't know Susan, she is probably has the most integrity. Integrity is like kind of, there's a couple words that come to mind when you think of Susan. One is integrity. The other is calm. She has this calm aura. And she's extremely talented and well-versed in our industry. She is a certified master sugar artist. For those of you who have not been around long enough, there used to be a certification before ISIS, which is not the ISIS that we are scared of, shut down. So yeah, we go back a little ways. It was a certification that was extremely difficult to get through. You really had to know every part of everything in our industry. I just remember it was an extremely hard certification to get. And Susan can tell me more about that. But when she came and asked if I would be her U.S. distributor for her, I was like, ah, what an opportunity. And I was like, if you carry it and you want it in the U.S., I will carry it. I don't care what it is. Well, almost, but
right.
Yeah. But if her name's attached to it, you know, it has to be good. So the first one we started in the Susan Trianos collection was Fluff N Stuff. And Susan's going to tell us all about it. And I'm not going to say much more because we want to hear from her. So I'm going to be quiet and go off stage. She will be able to hear me, and I will be able to answer any questions you all have. Sarah Myers is on. So, all right. So I'm going to bow down and let Susan take over. There we go.
Okay. So, Debbie mentioned that the first product in my line is Fluff N Stuff meringue powder. So this stuff is pretty amazing, I think. Debbie carries it in a 1 pound bag and a 5 pound bag, and it's priced very well. Great thing about this product is that it's, number one, it's kosher. It is tree nut free, peanut free, gluten free, and titanium dioxide free. So still get a really nice white royal icing. It's super fluffy. The best part about it, though, is it is a little more concentrated, less fillers than some of the other ones out there on the market. So you're going to get a third more product than you do from your typical 1 pound bag of meringue powder. So most meringue powders, you're going to get 10 batches of royal icing, 1 pound batches out of a 1 pound bag. And this one you will get 15 batches. So instead of 3 tablespoons for every pound of powdered sugar, you're going to use 2. It's got a really good kick of vanilla. So the vanilla is already in there, but not so much that you can't add another flavor profile to your mix and have the vanilla overpower it. Like, let's say you were adding Perfect Palate's raspberry, red raspberry flavoring. The vanilla would not overpower that. It would actually complement. So I look at vanilla as sort of like salt, as like a basic ingredient in baking. You make chocolate cake, there's vanilla in it. So caramel, usually I put vanilla in it. So vanilla is like sort of a basic sort of undertone to a bunch of flavor profiles. So yeah, so it's already got the vanilla in there. And there are also corn syrup solids in there as well, which will give your royal icing a nice soft bite instead of super, super hard and crunchy. But it will harden enough that you'll be able to transport them, package them, all that kind of stuff. So I'm actually going to make some royal icing with you guys today because I find a lot of people tend to screw it up, and it's easy to screw up, and it's also not easy to screw up. It's really simple. You're just adding water and powdered sugar, but there's some things that you really need to know so that you don't break your royal icing or have it where it doesn't fluff up and stays very heavy and doesn't dry properly. So I'm going to switch my camera around, and then I'm going to make a batch of royal icing. Once it's made, I'm going to talk to you about icing consistencies and also show you how I dip a cookie, because that's also an issue a lot of people have. So let me switch the camera around. Bear with me.
No problem.
And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to comment in the in this post, and Deb can read them out to me, and I can answer as I go.
Yep, and we're live on Facebook and Instagram, guys. And I am over on Instagram now to be able to answer questions as we do this.
Sorry, bear with me.
Here we go.
Okay.
We see a mixing bowl. Let me see on the Instagram page. There's a delay there.
We raise.
All right. Yep.
And Deb, let me know if you can't see.
Can you tilt it so we can see? There, perfect. Thank you. Okay. You're centered.
Okay. So actually, I'm going to move all of this a little closer to me so I don't have to stretch.
And we do have it in stock now on our Icing Images site. And if you go to our site, you will see a little tiny picture up in the upper center of Susan. You can click on it and get right to the Fluff N Stuff.
Yep, there we go. So I'm going to open the bag. And before I start mixing and making this royal icing, I'm going to talk to you. I want to talk to you about the equipment and the tools that you're going to use. Always use a paddle, not a whip or a whisk. That incorporates too much air in your icing. It can break your icing. It can cause spongy icing with a lot of air bubbles, and we don't want that. We want a nice, fluffy, creamy royal icing that has tiny air bubbles, not great big ones. The whole reason why we mix royal icing is to incorporate air, and that's what creates it, all that fluffy goodness. But again, we want small air bubbles and not really big ones. So if you're using a whip, that can happen. You can get too much air too quickly. And speed, we're going to talk about the speed of our mixer as well. Another thing that's super, super important, I have some water in the bowl here, just a little bit, just so you can hear. I want you to hear, hang on. I don't know if you can. My bowl is really grippy, squeaky clean. So I don't know if you can hear that, but I'll just dry it out, get that water out.
And we do have questions coming in, but I'm going to hold off because I think you're going to hit them all.
Okay.
So don't panic if you're not getting answered right away. I do see them.
Yeah. So really squeaky. I don't know if you can hear that. Okay. So I have a nice clean bowl. When I wash my bowl and my paddle, my whisk, anything that touches my royal icing has to be squeaky clean. So I use a lot of dish soap and rinse it really, really well, because I do mix my cookie dough in this bowl. I do use my paddle for my cookie dough, and there is butter. So that is grease. We do not want a trace of grease in our royal icing. If we do, it won't get fluffy. It will be very heavy and it won't dry properly. Okay. So I have a tablespoon measure here, and I have a 2-pound bag of powdered sugar. And the recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of meringue powder for every pound of powdered sugar. I'm going to make a batch of 2 pounds of powdered sugar, so I'm going to need 4 tablespoons of
So
meringue.
you're making a double batch?
I'm going to make a double batch. Yep.
So I noticed something right now.
Yep.
You are using 2 tablespoons. Isn't that's not the norm, is it?
No, the norm is 3 tablespoons. I was talking to somebody at CookieCon and she was using 4 tablespoons for every pound. There we
And
go.
so then that means that bag that you have, the 1 pound
Yep.
bag, um, that basically goes further than other brands who require 3 or more
Yep.
tablespoons, right?
Right. So typically, if you were to use 3 tablespoons for every pound of sugar, you would get 1-pound batches of Royal Icing out of the bag. This one will give you 15.
Okay. And then I have another question for you because you didn't cover it yet.
Yeah.
Stacy asked, do you remember using a paper towel with some vinegar on it, similar to preparing egg meringues?
Yeah.
Or do you recommend?
So
Sorry. Yeah.
I do that only when my husband does the dishes, and although he says he uses a lot of soap, when he washes my stuff, I will go with a paper towel and some vinegar, or you can use lemon juice and wipe everything down. But you're going to have to get in with that paper towel in all the little nooks and crannies of your paddle and everything. I do just prefer to use a lot of soap and wash it down. It's super grippy. But yes, vinegar or lemon juice will degrease everything as well. And thank you for mentioning that, Stacy. Okay. So for every 1-pound recipe, I use 5 to 6 tablespoons of water to my 2 tablespoons of meringue powder. Now I have 4 tablespoons of meringue powder in here because I'm doing a double batch, 2-pound bag of sugar. So I'm going to use 10 to 12 tablespoons of water. I always start with the lower number first. For a 1-pound batch, 5 tablespoons, or a double batch, 10 tablespoons. And then depending on the environment and what the weather is like, the climate that day, if it's super humid outside, most often times that 5 tablespoons is going to be enough. If it's super dry, sometimes I need that extra tablespoon. So your climate really does impact your recipe. So I'm going to show you what to look for, though, to know whether that's enough water, the 5 tablespoons, or if you need a little bit more. Okay, so here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's for a single batch. So we're going to put another 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So you can do one of 2 things here. You can either put this on the mixer with your paddle and just mix it on low, just enough to sort of melt any of the sugars that are in the meringue powder. You can do that with your paddle. I just come in with a whisk, and my whisk is grease-free too. And I just give it a little stir, make sure it's all incorporated.
While you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead
Yep.
and hit some of these other questions that we had.
Yep.
Oh, I got to find them. So there's no need to add any corn syrup.
No.
Okay.
No need to add corn syrup. I mean, you can still add more corn syrup. The only time I would do that is if I wanted like a super glossy royal icing. But this gets really glossy in the dehydrator. If you put your cookies in there for 15-20 minutes, they'll get really glossy. But if you want them to be like super glossy, and maybe you don't have a dehydrator and you're using a table fan instead, then you could add more corn syrup, but there is no need to add it because it's in there.
Now, I wanted to mention something. There's corn syrup solids in it, correct?
Yeah.
That's what I thought. I'm just making sure. If you are printing on the cookie, or even depending on the icing sheet you use, anytime ink is exposed to a corn syrup that is lower of quality and higher in volume, you risk having the image change colors. There's that, and titanium dioxide can also cause that as well. So if you're using something that has that in it and your colors change, that will be the reason why.
Yeah.
But there's no titanium in this, right?
No titanium dioxide. And titanium dioxide is it kind of acts like a food bleach. If you were to add titanium dioxide, say you were making modeling chocolate with white chocolate, and you added titanium dioxide to it to make it white, it would whiten, but it wouldn't be pure white. But if you let that sit, it continues to kind of bleach out the color in your product. So oftentimes, like if you are mixing fondant and you put purple in your fondant and it goes gray, that means there's a lot of titanium dioxide in whatever fondant it is that you're using.
And it doesn't matter what brand ink you're using. It could even be food coloring that can happen with anything with color, right?
Yeah. Okay, so I've got my powdered sugar here. I'm going to just dump it in the bowl. I just stirred my meringue powder enough just to kind of dissolve it in the water. I mean, you could even use a fork. It doesn't have to be a whisk. Okay, so I'm going to put my paddle in there. I'm going to move my mixer over and let me know if you can see what I'm doing here.
I'm watching.
Okay, and I'm going to
see what you're going to do, and then I'll tell you.
So you see inside the bowl. And here we go. So I'm going to attach my paddle, lift my bowl, and I'm going to turn it on to stir. Usually the highest I go when I mix my icing on my KitchenAid is stir or speed 2. Sort of for the same reasons why I don't use a whip. If you have your speed up too high, you're incorporating that air that we want, but you're incorporating it too quickly and too, like, it's aggressive, and you will end up with over whipped icing, really big air bubbles, and not those like spongy. Like if you look at your icing, it'll look spongy, big holes, air bubbles, rather than really tiny holes and smooth and creamy. Okay, I'm going to stop this for a second, and you're going to see the texture of this icing is sort of like peanut butter. It's thick, it's gloopy, but it's not so thick that my machine is like struggling. If your machine's struggling, you definitely need more water. But it's very thick, peanut buttery consistency, and it has, when it sits and rests, it will form a gloss on the top of the icing. So we have a good consistency here. I don't need to add that extra tablespoon or 2, because this is a double batch, to my icing. So I'm going to let that go.
You didn't sift the powdered sugar, correct?
I did not, because I opened a fresh bag of powdered sugar. And sorry if you hear me call it icing sugar, that's what we call it in Canada. So icing sugar is powdered sugar. So I did not sift it because I opened a fresh bag. And our sugar here is very good quality. There isn't like little bits of hard sugar or like little sugar rocks in the powdered sugar. And sugar will get clumpy when it's exposed to air, because there's moisture in the air, right? So sometimes I buy like big 20-kilo bags, which is like a 44-pound bag of powdered sugar. And obviously I'm not using that all in one go. So I open the bag, and once that's opened, it starts to clump. And that is when I would probably sift, but I'm lazy. So I like to buy 1 or 2 pound bags that I'm opening fresh every time, because it was sifted before it went in the bag. and it is lump free. The only
Okay,
time
oh, go keep going. Sorry, finish.
yeah, the only time I've experienced powdered sugar that had like little rocks in it, I don't know what brand, like rocks of sugar, like hard sugar. Um, I was in Miami. I don't know what brand it was. I got it at Walmart, and there were like big chunks in it. But normally you don't have to sift. That was a very long answer for a simple question. I apologize.
No, it's a good answer. All right, I have a couple more questions.
Yep,
Tell me if you need to interrupt me because I know you
yep.
only whip that for a certain time. Jeanette over on Instagram wants to know how you get your icing to a floral consistency.
Floral.
Floral.
For piping flowers, that's really easy. You want to make sure you whip your or mix your icing to a full peak. I do find that when I watch a lot of cookie videos, I what I see is a lot of decorators mixing their icing to more of like a medium peak, and they don't mix it fully to build the structure of the icing. So I'm going to stop right here because that was mixing for probably a couple of minutes. And I find I see a lot of cookie decorators stopping their mixing at this point. And here we have it here. And I see this kind of a consistency. It's starting to get some air. When it sits and rests, it's getting a bit of a gloss. It's gloopy. It's not like really super fluffy. And that is not long enough. Okay. You always want to mix your royal icing to a full peak, which takes a good 5 to 7 minutes.
Oh, that's great.
So I'm going to let this go. And what I just showed you is not a good consistency for flowers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this go to a full peak or a stiff peak. And that is your perfect flower piping icing. And then once you get it to that consistency, you add water to, because you've built the integrity of the icing. You've whipped it long enough. You've incorporated enough of those tiny little air bubbles for it to have structure. And then you're going to add your water slowly to bring it to whatever consistency you want. But for flowers, you want to do it full peak, and that's what or stiff peak, and that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to put some in a bowl, and then we're going to work our way backwards. So even if this is the consistency I wanted, I wouldn't stop here. I would continue to mix it to its full peak and then add water to bring it back to this consistency because we're building our structure of the icing.
All right, some more questions.
Yeah.
How different is it from Genesis or CK? Yvonne wants to know.
So, oops. I actually have some royal icing here that I made earlier, and I'm going to add it to the bowl, and I'm going to incorporate all of it because I have a project to do as soon as we get off this call, and I want all my icing in the bowl. And so see here, this is spongy icing too. This is sat royal icing. All those tiny little air bubbles will collect and make like a big air bubble. So when you're working with royal icing, it's good to keep your stiff royal on your mixer, and every 15-20 minutes or so give it another mix on low speed just to break up those air bubbles. And sorry, Deb, what was your question?
It was how does it differ from Genesis or CK?
So I don't know what Genesis is. I've never heard of that. I don't think that's a brand that's really available in Canada. But CK, I have to say, was a great meringue powder. I liked it quite a bit. And I would say it's pretty comparable to CK.
Now, did CK have titanium dioxide in it or not?
I do not know.
Okay. All right. And
but
then,
it did make nice fluffy royal icing.
Maybe it was Genie. Sorry, somebody just corrected me. Oh. Genie's icing.
Oh,
not okay. Genesis.
Genesis.
Sorry.
Yeah. Honestly, I can't compare because this is all I ever use.
Okay.
I know I'm going to add a little smidge of water there. So I'm going to let that go. This is almost ready, just a couple more minutes. So genies, yeah. I can't honestly compare. I know that's a very popular royal icing or meringue powder. And yeah, I
You'll
know
have to try it and see.
you have to try it. Deb's
Now,
got Deb's got some sample packs. So if anyone's ordering papers or anything in the next couple of weeks, she's going to be putting some sample packs of the meringue powder in people's orders. But it is available now. Deb, what's your pricing?
our pricing is on a 1 pound bag, it's $23.95. And on a 5 pound bag, it's $99.
So I think that's pretty much in line, if not lower than what's
A
out.
little bit lower.
Little
Yeah.
lower.
Yeah.
So pricing's a little lower and you're getting more volume or equal. No, how can I say this? A third more royal icing batches out of a bag. So that's a good savings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we have lots of questions. So I'm going to keep asking until you say, I need to talk now. Okay.
Yeah.
If Julie wants to know, if you add another flavor, would you subtract that from the water?
I mean, unless you're adding like a ton of flavoring, I'm guessing you're probably only going to put a teaspoon in. Yes, you can subtract it from the water, or just, put your 5 tablespoons in, add your flavoring. And if you find that it's a little bit on the loose side, I always keep a little cup of powdered sugar and I add it a tablespoon at a time to adjust to get that peanut buttery consistency. Okay. So if you accidentally put too much water in, you can add more powdered sugar. Also too, just a little tip here. Let's say you have your royal icing and you make a flood consistency icing, or you're going for a flood that's like let's say you like 18 seconds for your flood. And let's say you accidentally add too much water. I always keep some of my stiff royal icing in the bowl, just a little bit. And if I need to thicken that icing, rather than adding to my flood that I've made too runny, rather than adding powdered sugar, which I know a lot of people do, I add more of the stiff royal icing because this has all of the structure built into it. When you add powdered sugar, you're going to have sort of like a very heavy royal icing that is not as light and fluffy or doesn't have those tiny air bubbles. And then you can start getting into a crunchier bite, like something that's a lot harder to bite into because you're not incorporating that icing that has structure in it, if that makes sense.
Okay. Julie Baker wants to know if you're going to be producing fondant in the future.
Oh, hi, Julie Baker. Julie Baker bought one of my 3D printers and she's doing really, really well with it. Deb, you want to answer that?
Nope.
Okay.
I gave it to you on purpose. We'll see what the future beholds. How's that answer?
Yes.
If you have a magic ball, use it.
Yep.
Zoe just ordered a 5 pound bag.
Oh, yay! I would like to. Let's just say that.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see. I'm going down and making sure I get all of these. Yep. You added a 2 pound bag of sugar, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And if you're looking for her recipe, it is on the Fluff N Stuff bag.
Yep. Everything's on there. Okay. How to know when your royal icing is ready. So when it's mixing, I have a really big bowl. This is a 7-quart bowl, and a double batch in here is very little royal icing, but I put all my royal icing that I made in here earlier today as well. So this is kind of like a quadruple batch that I have here. But if you have a smaller mixer, like a 5-quart, a double batch, you're going to notice that the icing's going to start climbing up the side of the bowl. And it creates sort of like a ring at the top. And you're also going to see that the royal icing sort of forms a ball around your paddle. When it starts to collect in the middle of the paddle, you know that you have enough air incorporated in it, okay? So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to show you what we've got. And to the person who asked the question about flowers, this is what we're looking for. So see how earlier I stopped the mixer and the icing was moving on its own and I had to keep turning it so it didn't land on my table in a big blob. This is what we want. We want it nice and fluffy, nice and white, and we want it to hold its peaks. Okay, so that is a good flower icing.
Notice how white it is, and it doesn't have any titanium dioxide. That's what I couldn't get over.
Yeah, I think a lot of people undermix their icing. So when you start mixing your royal icing, it's sort of like this creamy beige color. And as you whip it and it incorporates more air, the whiter it's going to get. So, so yeah, this is beautiful royal icing.
Now, did you use pure cane sugar or beet sugar?
Good question. Let me look at the bag. Okay. This is, we have two major powdered sugar or sugar companies in Canada. One is Redpath and the other one is Lantic. And I believe both of them are, should say somewhere on here. I believe it's cane sugar. It doesn't, I can look at this after, but I believe it's cane sugar.
I think it is because it's the same as Domino's, and I don't know why I know that answer.
So Domino Redpath brand in Canada is the sister company to Domino. So
Yeah.
Domino is cane, then that's what Redpath is, and Lantic is Redpath's major competitor. So I'm guessing they probably use the same thing.
Yeah, and everybody from Canada is saying it's cane, it's cane.
Oh, thank you.
Although now Kelly says if it doesn't say cane sugar on the package, it's probably beet sugar. But everybody who knows I guess what goes on in all the Canadians are saying cane. So put it that way.
Well, thank you so much, guys. I didn't want to, I'm pretty sure it's cane. I just didn't want to say unless I read it, but I'm sure it's somewhere on that bag. And after this live, I'll Google it, but pretty sure it's cane. Okay, so look how this is dreamy, beautiful stuff. And it tastes really good. Okay, so I've got a damp towel here that I'm going to cover my bowl with. But I'm going to show you how I make different consistencies. So I'm going to put some icing. Let's use my spatula because if I do it with my spoon, it'll take forever.
And Sylvia, I guess, just looked on her red path. She said it has cane sugar on the ingredients list.
Yep. So the one I used was actually Lantic or Rogers.
Okay.
Because that's what the grocery store closest to my house carries. All the grocery stores either carry the Lantic Rogers brand or Redpath.
Gotcha.
But I'm pretty sure this is cane. I think the Dollarama, their powdered sugar, I think is beet. If you get your sugar from the dollar store here. Okay, so I have here some, I'm going to come in a little tighter. And let's talk about consistencies. Now, in the future, if you have a hard time finding this live, if you go on Debbie's website, icingimages.com, there's a link to a YouTube video I did on icing consistencies and dipping and making royal icing and all that stuff. So yeah, you can always find that on Debbie's, on the Fluff and Stuff page on her website. There's
Yeah,
a
it's right. It's right above all the products listed,
yeah.
and it's actually a Susan Trianos collection page. Just so you know.
Oh yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Because there's more to come, and I'm really excited over the next product. And
Mhm.
um, I'm not going to give it away, but it's it'll solve a lot of problems for some people.
Yes,
Okay,
and that's what you're all about.
yeah, yeah. So when I add water, depending on the size of the bowl, if I have a bowl with like a ton of royal icing, I will use just like a little measuring cup and pour the water in. But when it's a smaller amount like this, I use just a little squirt bottle, like those travel size bottles at the dollar store. But this is my consistency that I use for piping flowers. So chrysanthemums, roses, you name it. You want it nice and fluffy and white, or whatever color you add to it, and stiff. Okay. So the fact that there's no titanium dioxide in here is going to help you when you want to mix reds, black, stronger, more saturated colors, because like I said, that titanium dioxide reacts with colors. So think about if you wanted to make this red and you're adding red and then you add white to it, it's not going to get red as quickly. You're going to use more colors. And that titanium dioxide is going to, it kind of makes for more faded colors, and your colors can fade on their own too once they dry. Okay. So,
So Becky is being easy again, and she wants us to take her all our money because she wants it all. Um, she's easy.
I love, I love.
Crystal has a good question. I'm still going down the list of questions, guys. So if I
Yeah.
haven't asked yet, it's coming. But I wanted to ask this question because I don't know this answer. While at CookieCon, she saw a royal that you could roll and cut to size of your cookies. Is that something you could do with this royal?
Okay. Was that a product that you saw that came out of the bag like that? Because there was a product there called moldable royal icing that you could form. Um, the If you wanted to have this the consistency where you could roll it out, that is all based on how much water is in here. So if you wanted more of like a dough, my 3D printer just finished. Silence.
We couldn't hear it. At least I couldn't.
Good, good. So yeah, if you wanted something that was rollable, you're just going to put less water in. Now, I would actually, instead of just putting less water and making your mixer work so hard, I would probably bring my icing to this consistency, like make a regular batch of royal icing, take out what you want, um, and put it back on the mixer and keep adding powdered sugar to it until it starts to stick together like cookie dough, and roll it out that way. Because if you put less water in your bowl from the very beginning, your your royal icing is going to be very stiff and hard, and it's going to be, your mixer is going to be working very hard, and it's going to be hard to incorporate that air. So if you were to make a dough right from the beginning and you don't have that air incorporated and you roll it out, you cut it out, when it dries, it's going to be very hard. So I would bring it to this consistency, take out what you need, put it back in the bowl, or leave what you want to stiffen and make a dough with in your bowl, and add powdered sugar to it gradually until it gets to the consistency of like a cookie dough. I hope that helps and makes sense.
That's a good answer. I just never knew that, so I had to ask right away.
So that air, just think of peanut brittle, right? peanut brittle, if you were to make it and you didn't put the baking soda in it to make it kind of bubble up, it's going to be like rock hard candy. What makes the peanut brittle easier to bite is all those little air bubbles. And that's why the baking soda goes in, right? Because it bubbles up and then it sets, and then you have an easier time biting it. So I would bring it to this consistency and then add powdered sugar to it to make the dough. Okay, I added a little bit of water here, and I'm going to mix this in. And when I mix water in my royal icing, I kind of fold it in, because if I just kind of mix, blah, it's going to splash everywhere, make a mess. And I don't want to create any more air bubbles than I need to, because I'm going to bring this right down to a dipping consistency. And the less air bubbles we have, the better. Okay, we have here sort of like a medium peak. The little peak on the end of my spoon is kind of floppy, but it's still holding its shape. You can see in the bowl, and it's starting to get a bit glossy, because that's because the icing is getting softer. When you have a stiff peak, you don't have glossy icing. So this is like a thick toothpastey sort of consistency. I would use this probably to outline some things, or I don't use this consistency a lot. Okay, it's pretty stiff, but it's a little more relaxed. I'm going to add a bit more water here, and then I'm going to make something that everyone calls piping consistency, which I think is sort of a weird term, because anything that's coming out of your bag, regardless of the consistency, is being piped. And they're all piping consistencies, in my opinion. So this is more of like a piping consistency, how people call it. I call it like a marshmallow fluff sort of consistency, or a toothpaste. A lot of people call it toothpaste. I'm going to add a little bit more water, and I'm adding the water like just a few drops at a time. And this piping consistency, marshmallow fluff consistency, soft peak, or toothpaste, is very creamy. It's very soft. You can see the peaks in the bowls just kind of flopping right over. The icing is getting glossier now. And if I were to put my spatula in the bowl and agitate and just wiggle my hand back and forth, I can force that icing to smooth out. Okay, there we go. So you can see there's some air bubbles surfacing, which is normal. No matter what royal icing recipe you're using, no matter what meringue powder you're using, you are going to get air bubbles in your icing. The looser it gets, the more air bubbles, and they're going to all come and surface up at the top of your icing. Okay, and with dipping, you kind of have to be patient with that. I'll show you what I do, because I'm very impatient. So I added a bit more water, and this is going to be sort of a toothpastey piping consistency as well, just a little bit softer. So if you were doing lettering, I would do a softer toothpastey sort of consistency, so that when I wiggle my spatula, it smooths out even faster. So if you wanted to do puffy icing on a cookie, you wanted really big bulgy eyeballs, this is the consistency I would use. It's softer than the one I just mixed, and when I agitate the bowl, it smooths out a little quicker than the last consistency. And as you go, you're going to start to feel what consistency is right for you, and you won't have to count. You'll be able to feel it and just see it. So I just added probably a teaspoon more water. Let's see what we get.
I like how you bring it down to the proper consistency rather than trying to build it up.
And you don't want to just, like, let's say this is the consistency you want. You don't mix it on the mixer to get this, because you haven't built that integrity and the air bubbles, right? It's going to be a very heavy, crunchy icing. So you always want to bring it to a stiffer consistency and then work backwards. So
Now, would you go ahead, keep talking.
this is really nice for writing and puffy icing. You can see it's beautiful. It's so creamy. It's holding its shape, but it's very relaxed and it's glossy. And there we go. We just agitate it and it's going to smooth out. So I'm going to bring this to a flooding consistency. And everybody likes something different. I like around about a 20 to a 22 second consistency, because then I don't have to line my cookies with a stiffer icing and then flood with a thinner. I like to have one bag for everything, or as few bags as possible, because let's face it, mixing the colors and filling the bags is a pain. So there we go. I'm going to count, and I can tell that this is still a bit too thick for flooding for me. Some people will flood with a thicker icing like this and then force it to smooth out. When you flood with a thicker icing, you're going to have more icing on your cookie. And I'm not into sweets so much, so I like a bit of a thinner icing and more cookie. It's just all depends on what ratio and icing the cookie that you like. I like a little less icing, but some people will flood with this. And it would take a while for this would probably crust over before it got a chance to smooth out on its own without a little wiggle. Okay. I like mine to settle on its own. So I just added about another teaspoon of water there. And folding that in. And I can tell this is probably going to be the flooding consistency that I like. Some people like to go with a thinner consistency, like a 15-second with a thicker icing as a border. But again, I like to just do it all in one go. So this to me is starting to smooth out on its own, is probably around an 18 to a 20 second, and I'm good with that. I like that. Any other questions, Deb?
Got plenty.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so Patricia wants to know if it's similar to Fluffy Puppy in Canada.
Yeah, it's very similar, but we jacked up the vanilla a little bit.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Mei wants to know if you can add a fresh squeeze of lemon juice.
I'm always cautious when adding flavors. I either like to use the powders, more than cake, or the perfect palette powders are really good.
Yep. And I posted their link up earlier.
Oh, thank you. If you're going to use fresh lemon juice, you have to be so careful. There's oils in the skin. So if you were going to use fresh lemon juice, I would put whatever you were using to juice the lemon or squeeze it, I would probably wrap a paper towel around that lemon half, like the half of the lemon, so that when I squeeze it, none of those oils that are spritzing out from the skin when you squeeze it get in your royal icing, because that oil can break down your icing.
It also messes with the colors, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. If you're using blue, for sure, lemon juice, the acidity is going to mess with your colors. So I would stick to a lemon extract that is an alcohol based. Make sure it's not a lemon oil or anything like that. Just you really want to be careful not to add any fats or oils to your royal icing.
Okay, and we recommend the More Than Cake flavor powders. They are high, they're intense, and so you only need a teeny tiny bit when you're using it. They also, by the way, have a peanut-free peanut butter flavor that is to die for. So check them out on that link. Yvonne also wants to know, is this a strong enough royal icing that it can be used for string work as well?
Yep. So all of my winning cake competition cakes that had string work all had this royal icing. Now, I'm going to give you everybody a tip. So when you do string work, egg white royal icing is very strong. Meringue, but I find it's very heavy, almost like not dead, but it doesn't have that fluff. It's very heavy, I find. Meringue powder royal icing has that fluff, and because it's fluffy, has more air bubbles and can tend to break a little easier than egg white royal icing. So here's what I do when I do string work. I do not like heavy, dense icing. I hate it. I love meringue powder royal icing. So when I do string work, I use meringue powder, and in place of water, when I'm mixing it in my mixer, I use egg white. So I'm using both. I'm using the egg white for the strength, and I'm using the meringue powder to incorporate that air to make it easier to work with. When an icing is very heavy, your strings can tend to sag. It's got like a weird, I don't know, doesn't hold its shape as well. So I prefer meringue powder, but I use egg white instead of water when doing string work.
Gotcha.
So I get
Okay.
the best of both worlds.
Awesome. And it looks like others feel the same way as far as what you're talking about.
Oh, good.
And I'm going to ask this question because I think it has to do with the same thing. And
Yeah.
it's my ignorance in your string work arena. Karen Harbaugh wants to know if it works well for extension work.
So same thing. Yeah.
That's what I thought.
So I would suggest using the meringue powder and egg white instead of water.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then Carol wants to know the shelf life of royal icing. Now, this is the meringue powder that she used to make the royal, but is there a shelf life on that?
So, oops. I'm going to talk about the shelf life really quick of just the meringue powder. There is
Okay.
16 months on that from the manufacture date, which is great. But royal icing that has been made, I read a lot of posts online where people are saying, oh, I make my royal icing like this. I cover it or put it in my bag, and I let it sit on my counter for days and days and days. And I've even seen people say weeks. If I'm not using my royal icing the following day or the day after, I've never ran tests to see how long it's going to last on the counter. But for me, I'm comfortable with leaving it on the counter a day or two. Any longer than that, I like to put it in the fridge. And in the fridge will help keep it from separating. The fridge will keep it fresher longer. So a couple days on the counter at room temperature. Any longer than that, I'm going to put it in the fridge, and I like it in the fridge for a week or two. And if I know that it's going to be longer than a week or two that I'm going to use that icing, I put it in the freezer, and that's typically I would say 3 months.
All right. I am going to be quiet for a little bit. There are more questions, but let's go ahead and let you do your thing.
So I've got my flooding consistency here. This is what I would be putting in a piping bag, outlining my cookie and flooding right away. I'm going to make this now. I'm going to turn this into dip. So I added another teaspoon of water, and my dip, I like it to be, so my flooding in a bag, I like it to be between 18 and 22. And I say that because we all count at different speeds. I have a student that uses a stopwatch. I don't. And for dipping, I like it to be between 5 seconds and 10 seconds. And again, that is all, if you're a slower counter, like 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, I would go at 5. I count more like 1, 2, 3, and that I like my icing to be at about 8 to 10 seconds. So I'm going to drizzle it on itself. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is about a 9-second. See those air bubbles coming up? This is completely normal. Now, if you were dipping a cookie, and I'm going to dip some cookies in just a second. If you were dipping cookies and you wanted it to be air bubble free, you can see they're all surfacing. They're all throughout the icing. Nothing you can do, no recipe, no meringue powder, no secret ingredient is going to stop that. Okay. So you can either cover it with plastic wrap and put the plastic wrap directly on the surface of the icing so it doesn't dry out, and let it sit for 20 minutes. In that 20 minutes, all the air bubbles that are towards the bottom of the bowl are going to creep their way up. And they're going to stick to that plastic wrap so that when you peel the plastic wrap back, you pop all those air bubbles. I'm not lazy. I'm impatient. Well, I'm lazy too, but
You are not lazy, girl.
well, I'm not lazy. I'm a step skipper. If I can skip a step, I will, because I like to go to bed at night. But I have some cookies here that I dipped a long time ago. I'm just going to dip the back sides of them. But you can see the air bubbles are still surfacing. I'm going to show you what I do to speed up the process of getting rid of those air bubbles. So this cookie here was dipped. This cookie, this was done around Mother's Day. See that really nice gloss? That was dipped and then put in the dehydrator on like 95 degrees for about 15 to 20 minutes. And that created a nice shell, glossy shell on my cookie. It's really pretty. If you like to paint on cookies, you're going to want to have this gloss because the paint isn't going to melt through your icing as quickly. If you have like a chalky consistency where you've just let it sit out, sometimes the color will just like absorb into that cookie. And here's one that was not in a dehydrator. Still has a bit of gloss, but not like this one. Okay. This one's going to absorb color really quickly. This one will give you some time to move that color around. If you're dusting your cookie, the one that wasn't in the dehydrator is going to take that dust a lot better than this one. This one, the dust will just kind of slide around. It will color, but you kind of have to work at it. Okay. So I've got these air bubbles here. I'm going to just with my finger, no one's eating these cookies. And if you have clean hands, you know, I know there's like everyone debates gloves, no gloves. So I've got a clean hand. I'm just breaking up the bubbles that are on the surface. And I'm going to tip my camera. Let me see. Actually, I'm going to put my camera on the other side so you can see better. Give me 1 second. There we go. Okay. Oops. Making everybody.
Wee. Everybody say wee.
Wee.
Yeah, I'm watching on Instagram. You were okay a minute ago, but no, I'm not. Now you're moving. You're moving and grooving.
Okay. Darn it. Hang on. Let me just get this back. Oh.
Looks, her dishwasher is smudge free from fingerprints.
There we go.
All right. Let me just see. Let the Instagrammers catch up for a second.
Yep.
So I can see. All right. They can pretty much see the bowl.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I want you
and
to see.
Facebook is fine. Facebook is fine.
So here's my bowl. I can already see I broke up some of the air bubbles. There's more creeping up. So if you let it sit for 20 minutes, those are all going to come to the surface and break. But again, I'm impatient. So I'm going to show you what I do to dip my cookies with all the air bubbles in there. Now, when you dip your cookie and you pull it up, that's going to encourage a lot of those air bubbles at the bottom to surface too. And if you do about 10 cookies this way, like I'm going to show you, by the time you get to around the 10th cookie, your air bubbles are going to be pretty much gone. But before you get to the 10th cookie, let me show you what I do. So I've broken up all the surface bubbles that I can. I take my cookie and I make sure, see how my fingers are sticking out the front? You do not want that. You want to pull your fingers back so that when you dip the cookie, you're not dipping your fingers in the icing and making a big mess. So I'm going to dip the cookie, making sure that the entire surface gets coated. I'm going to let that drizzle just a little bit. Most people will then flip the cookie around really, really quick. But there's a ton of air, and then they let the icing settle. But there's all those air bubbles. There's some usually the edges aren't super clean. So what I like to do is I dip the cookie, I let the icing drizzle a bit, and I knock off that little drip, wipe it on the edge of the bowl, and then I flip. So there's all the air bubbles. And what I do is I just run my finger, and this is for about the first 10 cookies, in a spiral motion on the surface of the cookie. It's breaking up all those air bubbles. I can take the icing on my finger and just kind of fill in the little gaps on the edge. So I have a nice edge, and there we go. So you can see where I swirled the cookie, but because my icing is the right consistency, it was nice and thin. It was about an 8 or 9 second flood. That's going to smooth out, and I won't have those little divots where my finger smushed. Okay.
And you could do that with gloves on, right?
Yeah.
Good.
So when I wear gloves, I wear a size, and this icing, I would like it a little runnier, but I usually wear like a medium sized glove, but when I'm dipping cookies, I like to wear a size small. I wear one size smaller so that the glove is really, really tight, and it's like my own skin instead of like a baggy glove that's going to kind of catch icing where I don't want it. Yeah. So
Now,
we
you
have a
did the 17,000 cookie order, or 16,000, whichever it was, and you used this method. How many were you able to get done by dipping it this way?
great question. So it started out as, I'm going to make this icing just a little thinner. It started out as a 16,000 cookie order, and I did all the decorating was done with my big blue. If I didn't have my blue, I would not have been able to take that order. And if I did take the order without blue, the logos that I had to do wouldn't have looked exactly like the logo. So that's very important when you're doing corporate orders. I would have had to hire about 5 people. The logos wouldn't have been as good. And with the money that I would have paid those 5 people, I could have bought 3 blues.
With the profits.
With the profits. Or with the money that I saved, not having to hire anybody. So to answer your question, see how beautiful that is? There's not a single bubble. And you saw when I first dipped the cookie, there were a ton of bubbles. So just that little swirl gets rid of them. And again, by the 10th cookie, that'll be gone. So the order was for 16,000. And then when I was finished, they asked for another 1,000. And I wanted to cry because I was so mentally ready to be finished. And every day I would bake 700. I would do about 700 cookies. And so I'd bake them. And the ones that I baked would get dipped the following day. But I dipped versus flooding, and I was dipping the 700 cookies every day in 2.5 hours.
And that's the swirl method.
That's dipping and doing that little swirl. So again, once the air bubbles dissipated, I was dipping, knocking off that little tail, flipping, and I could go. When I first started dipping for the day with my first batch or my first few cookies, lots of air bubbles, and I just swirled them out.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
there's no way if you were flooding with a piping bag that you could get 700 cookies done in 2.5 hours. Like it
Yeah.
would take you an entire day. Another great thing too, when doing a large corporate order like that, when you're dipping, you're using a way less icing on the cookie. So that's more profit too, right?
Yeah.
Less product
Definitely.
that you have to use. And I think I used about 8 pounds of meringue powder, this very same stuff, the Fluff N Stuff. I used about 8 to 8.5 pounds of meringue powder for all 17,000. So think about it. That would be
Wow.
a bag, one and a half, five, or just a little over 1.5 of the 5 pound bags.
That's huge.
Pretty great.
That's huge. All
So
right.
break up these little air bubbles that surfaced. I'm going to dip another one. So dipping, shaking some of the excess off, knocking off that little tail. Oops. See when that happens? That's usually flour on the cookie. So I just dipped my ice, got more icing on my finger, fixing the edges a little bit. Swirl, 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 swirl. Done.
You know, every time you say the swirl method, I just think of Seinfeld.
I know. Was it counterclockwise or clockwise?
I don't know. I think you were going clockwise.
I was going clockwise. So there we go. Not a bubble in
Awesome.
sight. Perfectly
Awesome.
cookie. I'm going to do one more and then I'm going to show you what I do when I dip a really big cookie. So getting the excess off there, bringing it back, a little swirl, fixing my edges. There we go. And that's going to smooth out perfectly. Okay.
Awesome.
Yep. So one last cookie. This one is a 5-inch cookie. If I wanted to dip this, my hand is very stretched out. It's a really big cookie. The bowl's not very big. I risk dropping it. So I take my spoon, and you can do this with your smaller cookies too. I take my spoon. Let me back the camera up a little bit. And those cookies that the edges weren't very clean when I first dipped them, that's because those were my ugly cookies and they didn't go in my order. They had rough edges. Okay, so I'm holding my cookie and I take my spoon and I'm going to put some icing in the middle of my cookie. Okay. Whoops. And with the back of my spoon, I'm going to push to the edge. And this works for any shaped cookie. Pushing to the edge, doing that little swirl. And the back of the spoon is getting rid of all those air bubbles too. And we have a perfectly dipped cookie.
That's awesome. All right. Now, Patricia wants to know, being an 8-second icing, does it drip off the sides of the cookie?
Nope.
No, that's not what I was seeing either. And
So
then,
this is
then
this is the first one that I did. And that's also why when I dip and I knock off that little tail that's hanging, that's getting rid of all that excess icing that you don't need. Most people just dip, let it drip and flip it over, and there's all that excess icing. I like to knock that off.
dip, let it drip. Okay.
Yeah.
Donald Joyner asked if it was the same process with different shaped cookies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a little rectangle gingerbread cookie here. Let's dip that. And the same with the spoon. You can use the spoon with the spoon method with
The shapes.
any shape. So
Okay.
there, I rolled out all those air bubbles. They're gone.
Okay. And then Don also wants to know of the shiny ones or the dull ones, which do you think is best? Um, isn't that a preference? Or Don, are you asking about when you're printing on it? Which I think that's what he's asking.
Oh, um, well, when I did that big order, they were all printed, and I did put them. I have a bunch of 10 tray dehydrators, and I only was using one. So I dipped and I put them in the dehydrator, and then as it filled up, I would take the top half out, flood that, and then when that was done, take the bottom half out. So they were in there for about 15, 20 minutes. I like um, I like a crust on my cookie when I print. It works equally well both ways. Where I think with the cookie that is not in the dehydrator and is less shiny, the colors are going to soak into the icing a bit more. Whereas with the shell, it sits on top. I kind of like that. I like the crispness of it. And I just want you, when you bag your cookies, make sure they are completely dry. The icing will dry really fairly quickly, especially if you dust with cornstarch. But think about all that water that's in the icing. Even when your icing is dry, you think your cookies are ready to bag, but your cookie will absorb some of that moisture from your icing. You want to make sure not only your icing is completely dry, but the cookie itself has dried out too. And then you bag. Because if your cookie is holding any moisture, you're going to bag it. That moisture is going to reabsorb into your icing, reabsorb into your the food coloring from the printer, and that's when people run into issues of bleeding or the color sticking to the bag. And that's not just with blue. That's if you're using markers, edible markers, paint, anything. If there's any moisture left in that cookie, it's going to rehydrate and make a mess in your bag.
Okay.
I'm going to turn it back
Go ahead.
around so that, ooh, there we go. Nope. Why is it not swinging around back to me?
I don't know. Get on the other side of the camera.
But hang on. Let's try one more. There we go.
Hey! Awesome.
Yeah. So, and Donald, hello. I got to know Donald a lot. Well, I met him once before, but I got to know him at CookieCon. What a great guy.
I'm sorry about that. I've known him a long time. I'm so sorry. No, he's a great guy. He's going to come live with us too one day soon.
So there's the big cookie that I did with the spoon.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay. We have a couple more questions that we want to try to get through. Sorry, I'm trying to read and stay at the same time. All right.
Yep.
Lori Goodkin says that she gets more air bubbles as she dips. Any suggestions?
So if you're getting more air bubbles as you dip, when you're dipping, like I mentioned, when you dip and you're pulling up, you're pulling the icing up, and it's bringing more air bubbles up. If you're doing just like, if let's say you're just dipping 24 cookies, very good chance that only the last few aren't going to be air bubbly.
Right.
It's there's really no avoiding it. Some people have purchased like this machine that kind of I used to work.
Yeah, they were talking about it on here.
I used to work in a dental office, and we used to do impressions and molds, and we used this vibrating machine to get all the air bubbles out of our plaster. Now, I purchased one of those machines. I don't find it really does much. Like, it does get some of the air bubbles up, but not like when you're working with plaster. I don't find it's that beneficial. Like, save your money.
Yeah.
But yeah, just to whoever had that question about the air bubbles, just do that swirl. It gets rid.
Swirl. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Ann Snyder. I never get a shiny finish to my Royal. I've done all the tricks: fan, dehydrator, oven on lights, different brands of meringue powder, etc. I'm assuming it's because I live in the desert that has about 5% humidity. I'm thinking when we live in a humid place, maybe I'll be able to get the shine. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I want to ask what temperature she puts hers at.
Okay, we will wait for that answer. Um, okay, in the meantime, I'm going back. I think I actually got close to the end of these questions.
Yep.
Um, there was a statement from Jessie Ann saying sometimes she adds a little bit of cornstarch to help with the humidity in Southwest Florida, and she does sift. Again, she's in the humidity. It also helps with the floral. And then Don Joyner said Chef Nick used to put Tylos in his royal icing to make it moldable. That's when we were talking about that paste.
So moldable, yes, Tylos is definitely going to help with that because it gives it some stretch. If you're just looking to roll it out, kind of like rolled buttercream, I don't think you have to bother.
Okay.
But if you wanted to mold it, then definitely. That's a great point. Yeah.
Anne responded 95 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay. My suggestion is to try Fluff N Stuff. That a try. But also with your dehydrator, I usually tell people not to go above 95 because then you risk butter bleed. And I'm pretty sure we've all had butter bleed. It's a huge pain. It's where the cookies in the dehydrator and the dehydrator's too hot and it gets all the fats in the cookie greasy or soft again. And then your icing absorbs all of that. And it kind of looks like a greasy paper lunch bag. We don't want that, right? But in this instance, I'm going to recommend you go a little higher with your temperature in your dehydrator, but make sure you're not leaving them in there very long. Like put them in for 10, 15 minutes max and maybe try like 105, maybe 110, but make sure you're taking them out. You just want them in there long enough to form that crust. And then you're taking them out so that you don't get that butter bleed. And that extra heat will probably give you.
Okay. Now, that was, you just made me think of a question I had. When you bite into it, do you consider it a soft bite, medium bite, or crunchy?
So all royal icing is crunchy, but going back to my analogy about peanut brittle and the air bubbles and having when we say softer bite, we don't mean like soft where it gives way and is mushy. Soft bite meaning there's enough air incorporated in that icing to not be like, like that snap crunch. You want it to harden, obviously, and dry, but it's a soft bite in that there is, it's fluffy. The proper amount of air bubbles are incorporated in there, and those air bubbles are going to have where the royal icing is less of a solid mass and really hard and crunchy, and those air bubbles will help you bite through that icing and not be like.
Gotcha.
I hope that.
Okay. I think that's a very good answer. I liked the bite, so
Yeah.
I just didn't know what you called it,
Right.
So, and then someone wants to know what brand of gloves. What are the best gloves to use?
Ooh.
Everybody weigh in on your thoughts if anybody has any thoughts.
I try and avoid latex because a lot of people have allergies to latex.
Mm-hmm.
But I know Stacy bought some and brought them to CookieCon, and he didn't like them because the fingertips were a bit thick. I usually just get what's cheap. And again, I buy smaller than what I'd normally use, especially for dipping, so that the excess glove doesn't get in the way of my work and it's like a second skin.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, and Jennifer Lynn, she said the product's amazing. She got some at CookieCon, but she should have bought the whole lot. We have more. We have plenty in stock because I know stock is an issue in this industry with meringue powder. So we will not go there where we will make sure it's always in stock.
Yeah.
Susan uses awesome manufacturers. So
Yeah.
we know where the problems are and we won't have them.
No.
No. Okay.
I know that is a problem. Like I see posts, so this is back in stock, get it while you can. We don't want to run into those issues, and we especially when someone's used to using one product and then all of a sudden it's not available for you, that kind of sucks. So
yeah.
We're always going to have stock.
Yep, that's something we addressed immediately.
Yeah.
Kristen said she likes the nitrile black gloves. Stacy likes the Woostar. They're nitrile and thin enough that he doesn't lose his sense of touch. The gloves that he had at CookieCon were from Costco, great for ice them up, but I felt they were too thick for the cookie and cake work.
Yeah, because you still want to be able to feel what you're doing, right? Because you're not going to do your best work if you can't feel. If your sense of touch and your gauge of how much pressure you're applying and all of that, if the glove's too thick and you can't feel that, I know, but great for ice malt.
And then Desiree, does it work when trying to get the puff look?
Yes.
Okay.
So we did, I printed these Halloween characters using Lil Blue 2 at
Lil Blue 2.
And I like to embellish my cookies when I print them. That's just me. I like to add little googly eyes and things. And I added really googly eyes to all of the characters, and they were very puffy and round.
And Jennifer just I guess she's already used hers. Only like 3 days ago she got it. But she says the letters on details are seriously puffy. So,
oh, great.
Seriously puffy. All right.
How that makes me so happy. Like, oftentimes I worry because I've got very good instructions on the bag, and sometimes, and if you follow them, you're going to be successful. So I'm really glad you had puffy lettering. That makes me like, yay. We all love it.
Yeah. Yay.
Yeah.
It's puffy. All right. A couple things to know that as Susan unveils her collection of items, and already including with the Fluff N Stuff, is their tutorials with every product, video tutorials. So you get not only the benefit of Susan's awesomest favorites products, but also you get instructions from a certified master sugar artist. So you can count on that, which is really awesome.
Sometimes reading the instructions on the bag, some people are visual learners. So everything that I went through this evening, I think I went into kind of great depth in those videos. So if you find this live, it's all that link to the YouTube videos that I mentioned earlier is always going to be on Deb's website, and I will have it on my website as well so that you can always find it.
Awesome. And then if you can go back and answer this, because we're at an hour and a half now, but somebody wanted to know why you started developing your own products, your own product lines.
Well,
if you can do it fast, because we're really late.
Yeah. So I've been in the industry 37 years. I have a background in research and development. I've worked for Pillsbury, Wilton, General Mills. It's just a natural next chapter for me. I've touched every aspect of the baking industry: sales, marketing, R&D, everything. And I just saw a need in the market, and I know what I like and what works best for me. And hopefully you guys find success and ease of use like I have with some of the things that I work with.
And that's why I said, yes, anything you want, Susan. So you can find those products both on the Icing Images website in the US, but also on the Learn to Cake website in Canada.